Yeah, so we're sitting here in Albuquerque, New Mexico, with Richard Rohr, who I know many of you that listen to this show are a fan of, as we are. And they have this lovely campus here in the barrio
of New Mexico.
of Albuquerque, yeah. And we just wanted to sit down and gather a little bit of wisdom from you if we can. We're called the Liturgists. And one of our big things is we tend to have a lot of people that feel spiritually kind of frustrated or homeless.
Yes.
But people that are still interested in spirituality or whatever. So we talk art, science, and faith, kind of find ways of how they intersect.
Good for you. That's wonderful.
And we just wanted to chat with you a little bit. So,
all right, wherever you want to go.
We were thinking some of the things.
There's a lot of places where the things we talk about, you talk about a lot better.
Yeah.
We often speak of the essential nature of mysticism in Christian faith and practice. For us, that was a reaction to a journey through doubt, in my case, atheism. That embrace of mystery, finding a God in an experience can help you find a grounding that maybe a list of rational propositions don't do as well.
For sure.
And I'd love to hear, when you talk about a mystic, what you're thinking about and what you mean.
Okay, let's start there. All right. For me, and I try to make it as simple as possible, I simply mean experiential knowledge of God as opposed to seminary, textbook, even biblical knowledge of God, which is still, for most people, one or two steps removed from experience. And both of are you from an evangelical background, or what would you be?
Originally.
I was a Southern Baptist.
Yeah. Both Catholic tradition and Protestant evangelical. We all had our own biases against experience, right? We Catholics, especially after the Reformation, became very defensive because, we lost half the church to you terrible heretics. We circled the wagons, and actually, without knowing it, we got in bed with Western Enlightenment. And so the Christianity I was raised in was very rational, intelligent, systematic, appealed to intellectuals. The typical Catholic that you would probably have known on a street corner parish in almost any city was filled with icons and devotions and statues, which looked very pagan to you. But that's all they had. The amazing thing is, and this would fit in with your concern for art, very often art opens you up to mystical experience more than words do. Yeah. And so the Catholics had an advantage without realizing it and produced a lot more still inviting people to the mystical level. Starting with Luther, and of course I totally understand. Luther saw what we Catholics had done with the word mysticism. We made a lot of cheap sentimentality and pseudo-mysticism into mystical language, supposedly. Well, the pendulum always swings, as you know. He swung it to the other side, and he basically said, I don't believe in mysticism. We don't want Lutheranism to be mystical. He didn't know what he was saying because he was throwing out the higher levels without meaning to,
Right.
The early Protestant Reformation, which was coterminous with the invention of the printing press, thank God, but it moved the whole Christian message in the West, not in the Eastern Church so much, to a highly heady left brain level, and therefore we set up for Western atheism. We set people up for Western agnosticism. It's uniquely a phenomenon of Western Christianity, this virulent atheism anyway, this angry atheism, So we and I say that to Christian groups, we got to take responsible by the pitiful way we presented the gospel, So, did I answer your question? What was your first? Oh, you just said mysticism.
What do you mean by mysticism?
Experiential. Yeah, experiential. And if you say it that way, then you avoid all this sense of that it's higher level. In fact, it is. But once you say higher level, you appeal to the ego and you appeal to all the wrong instincts in people. So I don't want to say higher level, but it does call forth in a person, and you use the right word, an immense respect for mystery. And once you respect mystery, you open very quickly to paradox, to what I call non-dual thinking, you probably know, which is almost the best descriptor possible for mystical knowledge. Mystical knowledge is always non-dual. You understand it? It doesn't get into this argumentative either or Republican, Democrat, gay, straight kind of language that we've got. Almost the only language left in America, or the West. Because we in the Christian church, in my opinion, didn't do our job. For 500 years, we haven't been doing our job.
How do you see the Catholic Church embracing mysticism versus more the modern Enlightenment? Because interestingly, I actually tried to become Catholic. I half-heartedly tried for a little while. Well, for a minute I was wholehearted. I got discouraged quickly.
Good.
I went to Assisi.
Did you?
I did. I did a retreat, a week of silence there, meditation.
Where'd you live?
It was a place called the Simple Peace. They have like a retreat center.
Oh, okay.
Just for a week, and going into the tomb of Francis, and the whole town just felt. And I guess it was because I'm meditating most of the day that I'm coming into this place, and
it reeks of spirituality.
It really does.
It really does. And many wise people have told me that who aren't even Christian. Yeah.
Yeah. So after that, I was like, I think I want to be Catholic. This is. I know they're saying.
Jim Wallace told me the same thing. I took him there when we were young men. You know Jim Wallace of Sojourners.
Sure.
Yeah. He said, "God, this town could make a Catholic out of me." Just for I said, "Don't do it."
Well, then I visited a priest in Denver where we lived, and it's sort of like, here are the dogmas, here are the doctrines of the Catholic Church. You will have to say, I believe and ascribe to all these things. And I was like, I don't know, I can't say I believe all of anything really. So I kind of lost some heart. But I'm curious about where you see it currently. I'm sure there's a lot of diversity within the Catholic Church. Where do you see it going? Where is it at?
Mm-hmm.
No, I mean,
well, you put your finger right on it. You know, most think because you picture us Pope, Cardinal, Archbishops, Bishops, Deacons, all that, priests, it looks like the ultimate linear system. Mm-hmm. Here's the paradox, that when you have that strong a superstructure, you actually can hold together much more diversity. It's no one would suspect this than the typical Protestant denomination can hold together. Because you've got to hold it together by a scripture quote. We hold it together with ceremony and roles and statues, and that holds together much more. It's a much bigger tent, ironically. So you put your finger on them. Catholicism is from far right to far left, and we'd all call ourselves Catholic, which is, as you know, the meaning universal.
Right, the very meaning of the word.
It is what we're supposed to be. But I've often said Roman Catholic is an oxymoron, and we've been more Roman Catholic than we've been Catholic. And here's where the Protestant Reformation was so needed and so important to point out the idolatry of Rome. Now we're saying this, as you know, in a strange time, because now we have a pope that we could, wait all of history for. He's the best thing that's ever happened to us. So right now we're all in favor of the papacy. It's like a benevolent monarchy is still the best form of government, as Plato said. I mean, this guy's just moving through changes that would take 100 years of congressional votes or discussions, and he just moves it through. It's wonderful. If only he could last 5 more years. Please, God, let him live 5 more years. So, in answer to your question, Catholic, this is a cliche, but it's the best and it's the worst. Because it can hold together the big tradition. And if you have the desire, which you originally elicited or showed, you can find it much easier inside of Catholicism than you can in the typical Protestant denomination. Right. That's just true. That's not meant to be anti-Protestant. Sure. It's just you came along too late in history. And, if you just start with John Calvin, it's just
I'm not a fan.
It's just too late. It's just way too late and way too narrow and way too moralistic. I mean, both Luther and Calvin were not mystics. Yeah. And I was told that by the Lutherans in Germany. Yeah. I was even the Catholic speaker at a conference, one of the last trips I took before I turned 70, and it was Luther a mystic? And there were all these Lutheran theologians there. I was the Catholic who was, I don't know what I was supposed to be, the devil's advocate. But I didn't have to say it. They said, no, he wasn't. But of course, why he lost it was our overdoing the thing so poorly. And then condemning him and painting him into a corner. And he did, by the end of his life, become a very angry man. And you can't be a mystic if you're angry. You just can't. Yeah. you lose it. You lose the non-dual mind.
That's a particular topic of passion for me.
Yeah.
That's neurologically true. So brain scientists wholeheartedly agree that you cannot be angry and a mystic at the same time. They are opposing parts of the brain.
Do they? They say that directly.
They
well,
do.
That's good to hear. Yeah. In my class in January here with Living School, I had a wonderful therapist from Chicago who is also a neuroscientist. Just to affirm what you said, you'll love this. I've been using it everywhere. He said, we can now prove fearful, negative, hateful thoughts are like Velcro. The neurons just grab around them and solidify and myelinate. And here it gets better than that. I think better. Positive, grateful, loving thoughts are like Teflon. They use this, that they just slide off. Unless you savor them consciously, this is contemplation. So it's a whole new argument for it. Unless you savor them consciously for at least 15 seconds. Positive, grateful. I mean, you've all seen things that are just, oh, that's beautiful. And you walk right by it. You've got to sit there and savor it and taste it and consciously, we would say, give God thanks for it or something. And only then does it imprint. And he had the neuroscience for this. Yeah. So just what you were saying.
Wow. So that's actually the core of what I wanted to talk to you about.
Oh, okay.
Because we have all these listeners. Some are current Catholic, some are former Catholic, current Protestant, post-Protestant, evangelical, post-evangelical. This big tent, what they all have in common is they're at some degree frustrated or disenfranchised, but have a longing. They're not done.
Yes.
And what they have trouble with is finding a way to that experiential knowledge. So we've just thrown a little tidbit on the program, if you're paying attention, of taking 15 seconds to focus on gratitude when you encounter beauty. But what are some other things that, as you teach people about action and contemplation, that you teach them to practice in order to foster that gratitude?
Much of early stage contemplation, it doesn't sound prayerful or pious at all. It's largely recognizing the depth of your addiction to negative thinking, to compulsive thinking, to repetitive thinking. You have to be humiliated by that first of all. And that's most of the first year of contemplation, that every time you try to sit in silence, you see what comes up first. And what comes up first is the crap. It's just all of that Velcro stuff that wants to grab onto you. And you're so used to grabbing onto it that you let it happen again. So first it's recognition. Secondly, it's humiliating recognition. That I've been here 15 minutes and all I've thought about is myself or whatever it might be. That's such an imploded world. How could that mind ever be capable of God? You understand? That's what you have to first realize. And then you beg for grace, for the open field, for freedom. I tell people, so many of even your generation who will say, I don't need to be saved from anything. Why are you telling me I need a savior? I say, you just try to release yourself from one negative thought that you're attracted to, and you'll see you need a savior. You can't do it by yourself, by just willpower. It's the old don't think of an elephant thing. Or when I was a little Catholic boy, don't think of naked ladies. They just set us up to be obsessed with naked ladies, not realizing that. So it doesn't sound very inspiring, does it, in the first stage? Now, the scripture I use is Mark 1:13-15, where Mark says the Spirit drove him into the wilderness. So first of all, you almost have to be driven there by circumstances. Now, it is the Spirit driving you, but you don't know it. And where the Spirit drives you is into the wilderness. The chaos, the confusion, the narcissism of your own inner world. And then it says, if you remember, and there he met the wild beasts. Now, anthropologists say there were no wild beasts in Israel at Jesus' time. He's clearly talking metaphorically, There's no lions and tigers who would have caught you in Palestine at that time. And then the next wonderful line, and then angels ministered to him. It's just these three verses. Spirit drove him into the wilderness. There he met the wild beasts. and angels ministered to him. If you can endure the attack of the wild beasts and not give up by all the negativity, crap, past wounds, all that we all carry usually from our earliest years, and it's all in the unconscious. So all you're doing in the early contemplation, which is why Thomas Keating calls it the divine therapy, you're taking the lid off of the unconscious. You really are. And once it comes up, what first comes up is not wonderful. It's confusing, it's angry, it wants to blame somebody, it wants to hate. That's why our politics, I mean, look, don't you just want to cry at these debates? Don't you just want to cry? This is what our country has produced.
It's terrifying.
It's terrifying. But it's predictable when religion has been doing its job for 500 years of transforming consciousness. We have people who are educated but not transformed. The ego is still totally in charge. And that's true of both sides, really, you know, maybe some, certainly much less than others. But first you recognize it, then you recognize you need help to get rid of it. You know that wonderful line in Romans 8, we do not know how to pray. So the Spirit is sent to us in our weakness. So it's like the first step of the 12-step stuff, you know. First you got to experience I don't know how to get rid of this. This is the way I've been thinking for 30 years. Now I use the proverb, the dog returns to its vomit. It's not a very pretty proverb, but every person I've taught contemplative prayer, they have to suffer that much of the first years. Just that we're all addicted to our way of thinking. And our way of thinking has very predictable patterns. Now, I know I probably shouldn't say this on a Christian podcast, but you're ready for it.
This podcast.
Oh, this great. Okay.
Or barely.
All right. Okay.
Many Christians would not call this a Christian
The
podcast.
reason so many people were attracted to Eastern religions, and Buddhism in particular, the last 30 years really, is because Buddhism made a science out of what I just talked about. You understand? Because they didn't eliminate experience the way we did. We just said, believe. You don't need experience, right? We never learned how to refine experience, to critique experience. You've heard us Catholics talk a lot about spiritual directors. It's one of the other gifts of Catholicism. You know, the Jesuits really refined it. One of the reasons, if you were in my school, I could encourage you to have experience and give you tools to trust your experience, is because we have the tools to critique experience. Now, the Buddhists have always had that. You understand? Whereas we just tell, well, believe John 3:17. And he believes John 3:17 with his angry, dualistic Alabama mind. Not to pick on Alabama, but you understand what I'm saying. It's just, it's useless. You can quote John 3:17 all you want, and there is not a psyche or a soul or a space ready to receive the brilliance of what that is really trying to communicate, or any other Bible verse.
So this is kind of an absurd question to ask.
I'm sure it isn't. Go ahead.
What is God?
Oh, God, that is an absurd. Here, I gave you permission and you got me anyway. Well, let's go back to what Exodus says is the only name by which I shall be known. You know, after he says, I am who am to Moses. There we have the key for not idolizing any name, for not thinking any name will ever be adequate. Have you read my book, The Naked Now, that second chapter on the Yahweh prayer? That it really couldn't be spoken. It could only be breathed. And this is immense breakthrough. If we would known from the beginning that the God who is revealing himself, starting in the Jewish Exodus experience, is unknowable through conceptual thinking. As John of the Cross then will say 15 centuries, or no, longer than that, 2,000 years later, God cannot be known, God can only be loved. And that loving then becomes its own kind of knowing. That's brilliant epistemology. Yeah. That's exactly what the Buddhists are saying. But John of the Cross is one of the few in Western Christianity, and he's not till the 16th century, shortly after the Reformation. It's precisely when we're losing the contemplative mind almost completely by the fights of the Reformation. That Teresa of Avila and John of the Cross emerged in, of all places, super Catholic Spain, the Counter-Reformation. Almost, I see it now 5 centuries later as a warning, You Catholics, you better not lose what your gift should be to the contemplative knowledge. My opinion historically is that each time we divide it, starting with the big division, the first one is when we aligned with Constantine, divided the church into ordinary street corner Catholicism, Christianity, and the whole group that went off to Egypt and Syria and Palestine and Cappadocia. That's the first great division. That's no small thing, because basically the contemplative mind was preserved there and in Ireland because they weren't part of the empire. The mainline Roman Catholic became, frankly, fast food religion. That's why we needed the Reformation. Then the second great break comes in 1054, when the Patriarch of Constantinople and the Bishop of Rome mutually excommunicate one another. Isn't that nice? Talk about dualistic thinking, But after that, we in the Western Church, which largely formed me, we nodded to the Eastern Fathers and the Desert Fathers and Mothers, but we didn't seriously study them. We studied the Western Fathers of the Church. Do you understand? People like Augustine and so forth. So when Protestantism comes along, you're at best reacting to one half of the half. Yeah. And this is what you're the first generation that's recognizing that, with some humility and gratitude. It's not you're not angry at anybody except you wish you would have gotten this sooner. But that's the hole Protestantism is finding itself in today. Not that we aren't in a hole too, but your hole is especially deep because most Protestants never had the contemplative teaching. Never. Yes. John Wesley was approaching it in a Methodist. Okay, then you understand. The heart strangely warmed, You have the roots of the rediscovery in Methodism. And even his word methods, it's like our word practices. You've got to find practice. But he was so far removed he didn't have the foundational contemplative teaching anymore that he would have only found in the Eastern Fathers and the Desert Fathers, about how you quiet the mind, how you let go. I mean, you go back to some of the Desert Fathers, Evagrius Ponticus, and, Origen isn't a Desert Father, but their teaching sounds Buddhist.
Yeah.
It sounds Buddhist. And now when we say it, people think you're a Buddhist. No, I'm a Christian in touch with the whole tradition, not just a piece of it.
Yeah.
That's kind of how I found modern Christian contemplative practice. I attend a Methodist church, and I'd been studying meditation strictly from a Buddhist and a secular mindfulness aspect. Then I started to explore centering prayer a little bit, and my pastor actually introduced me to your work, because there is this Methodism sort of all the Protestant churches, I think it might be the most warm or desiring of the Catholic tradition and presence.
It's the least angry.
It is.
We always feel that when we're around Methodists. It doesn't create angry Christians like many of the other denominations do. Yeah, wow. Yeah. Well, how'd you get to the Baptists then?
I started there. So my parents were Baptist.
I
grew up in the Baptist church, and I was like a really
good
Baptist until I wasn't.
Yeah, that's good. And remember, you've heard me say it's best to start conservative. It's best to start very grounded in something you believe passionately.
Yes, and I did.
It's much easier than the post-denominational kids who are growing up with an open field to which they get passionate about nothing in particular. You understand? Then to narrow down the field and to fall in love with Jesus, like a good Baptist does. They almost don't know how to do that because their critical mind keeps, all those provisos and so forth. That's where I'm the strangest combination of very traditional and conservative, and probably terribly out there. But the reason I'm terribly out there is because I'm traditional and conservative, and I mean that in all seriousness. I could prove that. That is precisely knowing the whole tradition, knowing the Jewish scriptures, knowing the desert period, the early church, that allows me to talk the way I talk now.
Interesting.
Yeah. And people would think it's just the opposite, And what set us back is this whole period of deconstruction from mainline Protestants like Shelby Spong, and who became in their own way, or Bultmann, I don't know what names you'd be familiar with.
Spong is, I'm very familiar with.
Who became so negative against the tradition, but while trying to reform it, they really were. I half agreed with them.
Spong was actually my stepping stone back to any sort of actual practice.
He would have
theology.
appealed to your rational, obviously intelligent mind. See, and I can agree with most of what Spong says, except my desire is to be a reconstructionist, not a deconstructionist. Do you understand? Where you just keep saying, oh, the doctrine of the virgin birth, you don't need to believe that, you don't need to believe this. That doesn't help anybody. It really doesn't, Rather, what wonderful symbol is being communicated in a belief in the virgin birth. Do you understand? And you get there, now you've got experiential Christianity. Do you understand? It opens you up to experience a lot more. But just dismissing things appeals to the rebellious, arrogant mind that says, oh, I'm not a superstitious whatever anymore. But we're getting there. We're getting there now. Your generation especially, it's mostly young men like you who seem to be getting this today. It's, one of my publishers told me that my single biggest demographic was young evangelical males reading my books. Blew my mind. Because some convergence has happened with those of you who were raised traditional, but you weren't raised traditional. So
I was
you were
charismatic.
Oh, good. Yeah. They're the ones who have their feet on the ground the most without knowing it. They've got their feet on the ground with lousy theology, but their early charismatic experience or Jesus experience keeps you, I know there's something real here. You understand? I know this isn't all just words. I know that there's something enlightening here. You see?
So that is very in line with my experience.
Mm,
Kind of go back to something you just said. To say you don't have to believe in a virgin birth or
whatever.
So where I've been, I had an experience with God, and it was distinctly Jesus flavored. If that makes any sense.
That's about all you could have.
And but it didn't bring me to any intellectual knowledge of any theology. And what I found in time was that I sort of voluntarily surrendered to an idea of a resurrection without taking it as a factual thing. I just voluntarily surrendered it to it. And it seemed to somehow keep open this conduit between me and God. But there's still more, I don't know where I think about a virgin birth or ideas like that. I don't necessarily examine them forensically.
You don't need
I
to.
sort of try to contemplate them symbolically.
Yeah, good.
But I often try to tell people in our audience, I'm not telling you have to believe anything. I'm telling you, if you're interested, you can be open to these experiences and see where they take you. And in that journey, something that was really powerful for me, I struggled a lot with the idea of an incarnation and a trinity. They just seemed like weird, absurd concepts to me.
Those are our two biggies, but go ahead.
But then I heard you talk about the cosmic Christ in the context of the Trinity.
Oh, good.
And there was a little hallelujah moment.
Yeah,
Would you just talk a little about the cosmic Christ in the context of Trinity for our listeners?
I got to have my book on the Trinity finished by this Tuesday, so I'm filled with Trinity these days. Oh God, where do I start? See, here's what we did. We pulled Jesus out of the Trinity and created a whole religion, which was Jesusism. And I love Jesus. In fact, if you've heard my stuff, I'll give more importance to Jesus historically than the evangelicals ever do, because he's cosmic. He's not just a historical person, which we find from Colossians and Ephesians and the prologue to John's Gospel. That was more the foundational Christology of the Franciscan tradition. Because of Francis's love of nature and animals and brother, sun, sister, moon, we immediately gravitated toward this cosmic notion of Christ inhabiting the universe, that creation was already redemption, that Christmas was already Easter, is the way we put it, And so Franciscans, we were the big popularizers of Christmas, Before that, the first 1,200 years, Easter was rightly the big feast. Unless you really get the full meaning of incarnation, that Jesus is the personal incarnation. I still believe that, I really do. It explains so much. But he emerged in a moment of time when human consciousness was ready for interface. But what we've had since the Big Bang is the manifestation of God in creation. And of course, I always have to use Romans 1:20. Everything you need to know is contained in the world as it is, Romans 1:20. The first Bible for the Franciscan tradition was nature, was creation, and now we're the first generation that could give an approximation of number to that. Somewhere between 13.8 and 14.6 billion years ago, we would say the incarnation began. In other words, God began to manifest what's going on inside of God, and it really fits. The first word is, let there be light. Now we know the one stable element is the speed of light, and there is light in every single inch of the universe, even in what appears to be darkness. So we know that there was a huge release.
Approximately 4 million photons per square meter.
Oh, you even see? I'm saying this to a man who understands. See, usually people think I'm making that up. And give us the word for that.
The cosmic microwave background radiation.
Isn't that great? But this Christ existed, as Colossians, Ephesians, and 5 other places say very clearly. The Christ existed since the beginning of time. We don't know how to picture that, but it did. All right. So, but what we did is we tried to make now you've got the perfect mind for this. We tried to make people fall in love with Jesus without falling in love with Christ. They knew nothing about Christ. So their Jesus was just way too small, way too tiny. I mean, if tomorrow, just to make it very practical, and you've figured this out already, when we discover life on another planet, the whole Christian religion is going to go through a major shock because its premise has been undercut, that we needed salvation from sin because of Adam on this planet. It's all based on that premise. All you really need Jesus for is the blood sacrifice at the last few days of his life, The first 30 years of his life can largely be ignored. Jesus taught us how to live, not how to go to heaven. And we took it all and moved it into this how to go to heaven later. So for me, I don't know how many years I have left, but I want to finish this Trinity book next week, if possible. But then the next one is, I've got to help people distinguish between Jesus and Christ. They overlap, but they're not the same. And when you say, as I hope you do, I believe in Jesus Christ, you're making 2 different faith affirmations that you were never told about. And so the reason we have the problems with racism and pollution of the earth and homophobia and sexism is because none of them met the Christ. Do you understand? Jesus becomes a competing religious figure with Muhammad and Moses or whoever else the Christ, there's no one to compete with. You understand? It's all embracing. It's nature itself. It's something that was available to the Stone Age people. I mean, could God have really created Stone Age families and said, well, you're just throwaway. I'm waiting for America to come and to discover discover the gospel. It's so narcissistic when you think of it, the way we've interpreted Jesus. Pulled him into a tribal God to support our country club religion. It was largely tribal. So first we got to expand the field by making our basic definition of God Trinity. All right. See, once you pull Jesus out of the Trinity, here's what happens. We made him into a monarch sitting on a throne. Look at the art, all of Europe, you know. He's God the Father again, because we don't trust God the Father. We don't even like God the Father, because he demands blood of his Son. He can't love us naturally. He has to get a blood sacrifice before he can love us. There was an inherent mistrust, I'm going to go so far as to say dislike of God, incipient in Western Christianity, especially once you got into this substitutionary atonement thing. So once you allow Jesus to be the one who comes forth from the Father, bringing that infinite love and saying, I have come to take you back with me. Now John 14 means a whole new thing, you know. It repositions, it doesn't throw away. I still would call Jesus the Savior, because he brings the whole message home to our believability and seeability and touchability, as 1 John says. But we've got to reposition salvation in creation itself. In the very beginning, God planted grace inside of whatever he created to evolve us to where we're evolved now. But that's a very different frame. You know, in my preface to this book on the Trinity, I don't know if you're familiar with, you are, I'm sure, Thomas Kuhn's The Structure of Scientific Revolutions, where he really introduced the word paradigm shift to the modern mind. I think maybe he created it. I don't know. But he says basically when you have a major paradigm shift, which Trinity was supposed to be, that God was a circle more than a pyramid, right? But you and I grew up with pyramid theology. It was all top down, from God the Father, you know, demanding blood of his Son. It's just so horrible when you think of it. Mm-hmm. Once you move away from the circle, that we're invited into the divine flow of the Trinity, which, I mean, the Eastern Fathers were obsessed with that. Mm. That was the meaning of salvation. Then you don't overplay the Jesus card, and you need all this blood sacrifice and blood atonement and so forth. It just got way pulled out of context. I'm not throwing it all out. I think you're prepared to know. It's just, you know, text outside of context ends up being the wrong text, because you don't know how to read it anymore. Yeah. And that's what happened to our. So first we got to get Trinity, then Trinity we got to define incarnation, coming forth from the Trinity as nature itself. Secondly, the personal, which is Jesus. Right back to Jesus. Now Jesus is the Alpha and the Omega of history, just as the book of Revelation says, in terms of a personal blueprint. Mm-hmm. Every time you read Logos in John's Gospel, just put the word blueprint, all right? He's the blueprint of what he's going to do everywhere else. He's going to put the divine and the human together in you and in all this world, you know. Jesus is the living icon of it, saying, follow me, trust this. What I put together, which is why the early icons always, he's holding the two fingers. I'm both. I'm human and divine, and I'm holding them together in this one body. Now we can understand salvation, first of all, as a corporate concept, as a social, historical concept, which it clearly was in the Hebrew Scriptures. You know them. God is always making covenants with Israel, with the people, with history. He uses individuals like Noah and Abraham, but through them, it's made with the people.
Wow.
But what we have now, especially from the last 500 years, is this terribly individualistic,
personal, professional,
watered down, how can you go to heaven, how can you go to heaven? It's well-disguised narcissism. It's well-disguised selfishness, which I think we're bearing the fruits of. You know, what's happening in this election right now is revealing the moral bankruptcy of so much of American Christianity. That people who call themselves Christians can think some of these candidates are even in the field of Christianity and can be excited about it. I will forever mistrust your interpretation of Christianity. If you could think, and you know the people I'm talking about, are even close to anything. But I think it's going to have that effect. It might be one of the good that you are bankrupt in terms of your ability to talk about Jesus ever again. Because you can't see hate, you can't see racism, You can't see arrogance. You can't see pride. You can't see deceit. List all 7 capital sins. Greed and gluttony too. They're all there for the whole world to see, and they're cheering for it up and down. Christians. It just breaks your heart. It just breaks your heart. But it's not their fault. Their Jesus they were given was way too small. And when he's small, what happens is he gets captured by culture. The Italians make him into an Italian, the Swiss make him into a Swiss. We made him into an American businessman, which is why we can elect American businessman president and think he's Christian. Don't get me on my political band, but it's hard not to be right now.
That's a pretty good.
It's just so sad. But
we've tried to be pretty apolitical in the history of our program.
Becoming less so
and
right
this
now,
election has made it very difficult.
You have to.
How can you not?
Because it's so antithetical to what I consider, and I'm very generous about orthodoxy. Very generous.
You sound like you are. Yeah.
But to associate some of these movements with the name of Christ to me is perverse.
Absurd, yeah. But if we don't discover the cosmic Christ, I think Christianity is destined to become a small tribal religion of prejudicial people, which are largely there now, not people with Thomas Mertons and Mother Teresa's and Teilhard de Chardins and people who are larger than life. We were supposed to create people like that,
right?
Big people,
right?
And we still do, but look at like someone, even a big person like Nelson Mandela, who I think did have some identification with Methodism, but to do his big thing, he largely had to pull back from organized Christianity. It was too small a field for a heart and mind as big as he was.
In a lot of the church, a cynicism about folks my age, and especially folks younger than me. But I am actually very encouraged by people from largely, we would say, secular background or secular frame of mind, find themselves responding to some invitation towards this movement towards reconciliation. It actually makes me very hopeful.
Well, good. And in my core, I am too.
Yeah.
That's a gift of the gospel and the indwelling spirit. That I have to fight cynicism every day, but I think in my deepest soul the battle's already been won. Do you understand? But I still have to work with it because I see the stupidity of America and of the churches. It's just, why would I waste my time? It's not even worth wasting your time on. Hope that doesn't sound too judgmental, but because this is the world we have to love, and I hope I can. Yes, go ahead.
I think people would love to hear, and I would love to hear some practical steps for people how to move towards a larger view, how to move into contemplation. I know you have a school here, but for people that can't drop out of their lives and go to a school, how do you start? And then I'm most curious of where you're at today with your practice, and how does it evolve over the years, or how has it evolved for you?
Wow.
And how does that still inform your experience of God?
It shows such maturity that you keep pulling me back to that. You got to realize how different that is from your forefathers. All they wanted to fight about or talk about was atonement theory or something like that,
We don't buy atonement theory at all. We're done with that.
It's all just up in the clouds theory.
Yeah.
But both of you pulling me back to practice tells me you're sincere and already along the path, or you wouldn't even ask that question. The future of Christianity is going to depend on two things. Of a reformed Christian, the rediscovery of Trinity as the nature of God, that God is a communion, not a man on a throne. All right, God in the beginning was the relationship, is the way I say it in my new book. The second is the rediscovery of practice. As long as we stayed in belief systems, we remained argumentative for 500 years, just arguing, and getting us nowhere, except creating very argumentative people who arguing is a way of life for them, So for you to ask practice, now let me give you some of that. Have you read the Naked Now book?
Yeah.
You've read that one. Okay, some of it's in there.
Yeah.
There's another one that I did with the Dalai Lama a few years ago in Louisville,
cool.
Silent Compassion. And I'm trying to bring the Christian tradition to the Buddhist tradition. And then the other one that most links contemplation with action is called Dancing Standing Still. Dancing Standing Still. Those are both fairly small books. You could read them in one good
And we will have links to those on the website at theliturgists.com for everyone listening.
Oh, okay. In the one I'm writing on Trinity, in fact, just yesterday I offered 5 practices at the end. See, once you go toward what you're asking for, there's no authority to fight, which has made us so anti-authoritarian. It's just anti-authority. You just say, do the practice. And then they come back and want to fight. I said, have you done it yet? Well, no, I don't believe in it. Well, then you can't agree with it or disagree. They do, they always want to dismiss it before they release themselves to it, And even the old Catholic rosary, you've seen pious little Catholic, that was a practice,
It's a good practice.
It actually has genius to it, Now even most Catholics don't know how to let it lead them forward because there's no good teachers. But anything repetitive, anything a chant, a mantra, well, you know it from your science. It stops the racing of the left brain, It stops your obsessive patterns of thinking.
I describe it in brain terms because you have a human brain that's wrapped around a monkey brain that's wrapped around a reptilian brain. And the repetitive motion and the repetitive chanting gives the monkey something to do to leave you alone while you practice.
Yes, that's a good way to say it. We're not making fun of your brain. No, we like your brain.
What about your current practice? How has that shaped over?
Okay. Well, it certainly, I was lucky that I joined the Franciscans when I was 19. Now, that's the way we did it before Vatican II. When Catholics always use this term Vatican II. That was the Great Reform in the 1960s, where the Catholic Church, one of the enigmas of history, reformed itself when it was doing very well. Our numbers were all-time high, and wonderful Pope John the 23rd said, let's let some air into this dusty old church. And but before that, we were basically a tribal religion, a ghetto religion. It was very happy, but very naive. That blew us open to the modern world, the documents of Vatican II. So, you didn't ask for all that, but I was raised in the old church. So, in the old novitiate, when I was a novice in 1961, we had to come into the chapel in the morning, in the dark, in silence, and kneel for 20 minutes, and pray. Now they were already teaching us some of what I now recognize was contemplation, So that gave me a wonderful start in terms of, even at the age of 19, to learn what to do a little bit, just a little bit, with my mind in those long, boring periods of silence, Then I have to say, I was ordained a priest in 1970 and really got caught up in ministry in the community. I started back in Cincinnati, and there was so much exciting happening, and it all began by a charismatic phenomenon on the night of November 8th, 1971. I was preaching to all these boys, and they began singing in tongues right at my feet, So I can't deny experience, because I saw these boys lifted up, moved from there to there right in front of me. And that's never happened to me since the very first retreat I gave, November 6th, 7th, 8th, 1971. It's never been repeated. But I call, and you'll understand, were you in the Assembly of God even, or no?
Similar.
Similar.
It's not denominational.
See, what charismatic experience is many mysticism. Mm-hmm. What it lacks is good theology. It doesn't know where to lead you after the Pentecost experience. But I know, and I suspect you know, there is such a thing as the baptism in the Spirit. There really is. All it's saying is there is such a thing as experiential knowledge of God, just what we're saying here. But by the same token, this community got so big so quickly. I was the big daddy of all these 19-year-old kids. Now I'm 29, they're 19. We sang, these are prayer meetings of 1,500 people, and the singing in tongues phenomenon kept me grounded in mystery and in the search for God. But there was so much happening. I can't say I developed my contemplative teaching for those first 15 years. I was just pulled into the world of of ministry, with young people in particular who want to talk to me all hours of the night. And it was just, I was surviving in many ways, even though it was great fun. And I saw a lot of healing and a lot of, again, the movement of divine energy. But then it was really only when I started going on the road. My early cassettes started getting me invited to work in third world poor countries, Peru and Philippines and so forth. Then I saw, and that's why I came here and founded this place, that so many people who I agreed with their progressive reading of the gospel, their Vatican II liberal Catholicism, their social justice concern especially, but again and again I saw them as angry people, not contemplative people, not happy people, just right people. But now we were right on the left instead of right on the right, you understand? And that's what made me move here 30 years ago and found this place. I said, we got to address this head on. How do we teach the contemplative mind? So I took a contemplative year in 1985 to discern whether I should leave Cincinnati. Actually went down to Thomas Merton's place and gave a retreat to the monks that year in Kentucky. And they gave me the Hermitage for 40 days after Easter. And I lived there 40 days alone. And without any doubt, that became the solidifying. My job the rest of my life is to teach the contemplative mind. That's the change that changes everything. You understand? Mm-hmm. Everything else doesn't change everything. It's just a new idea or a liberal social justice concern, all of which I'm for. But contemplation is changing the seer instead of just telling them what to see. And by and large, what our Christian sermons have done is tell people what to see and not how to see. And that's been my concern here. It'll be 30 years this summer that I've been here. And we ourselves then went through many stages, frankly, of some staff who got it and some staff who just got a paycheck here, to be perfectly honest. Yeah. Every organization goes through that. People who really get it and are passionate about it, and people who are just along for the ride, you know? And so we went in and out of that over 30 years. I've said sequentially over these 30 years, this place would have been a Native American spirituality center, an eco-spirituality center, a gay rights center, a feminist center, and which one didn't I mention? But depending upon the passion of the recent executive director, you know. Now we're really lucky. Do you know Michael, our present director? No, he set this up. So he knew of you, I guess, and asked me to take it. But this young man, and he is young, just early 30s, he really gets, even though he's a 7 on the Enneagram. Do you know the Enneagram? They're hyper enthusiasts. 5 and 9. Okay. So that's why you're both good listeners. You are. You're very good listeners. But 7s are, you know what they are.
Yes.
Well, here Michael is a 7, but he's got such a brilliant mind and such personal integrity that it makes me think I'm ready to go because he's putting together the real pieces with integrity of what I'm trying to say. He listens to what I'm saying and what I'm really saying. Better than I know what I'm really saying. Do you understand? So I consider him a great gift. And the 2 you met with are 2 other wonderful staff. My practice now, just to jump into the present, I live in a little hermitage around the corner. So I get to have plenty of hours just with my garden and my dog. And I wake up, make myself a cup of coffee, light a candle on the hearth there, and I spend usually the first 45 minutes. And not always in a perfect sit. Sometimes if I don't feel any inspiration, I'll pick up a spiritual book to try to get myself stirred a little bit, you know. Sometimes I'll journal and write what's coming up, and sometimes I'll just sit and, you know, look at the candle. That's the most common thing, I think. Then I come over here in that room where you just were, and at 8:30 the staff meets there in that circle, and we have a sit together. And not all the staff is required to come to it. A lot of, to be honest, we have 20-some people on staff. I think some don't care in the least about contemplation. They're just holding a job. They're holding a job. Don't repeat that. Well, it's going to be repeated. I'm not putting them down.
100,000 people or so.
Not
No
putting
big
them
deal.
down. But see, we haven't distinguished between career and vocation, in all of our people. And all we have is a sense of career and occupation and what pays the bills. You two clearly have more than that, which means you're understanding our life as vocation. And I always say, what you do, even when you aren't getting paid for it, that's what you're passionate about. That's your vocation. And if you need to be paid for every little thing you do, you haven't moved from occupation to vocation. But fortunately, an awful lot of people coming through this place have, I think, discovered their vocation, what they would do even if it wasn't paying the bills. Yeah.
How long do you guys sit together?
Oh, this is 20 minutes.
Okay.
And then I read the Gospel of the Day. We have a lectionary, probably Methodist Church does too. And then, you probably didn't notice it, but there's a whole pile of prayer petitions people are always sending us. Then we read those, we pass them around the circle, everybody reads one, to just keep the suffering of the world in mind. And then we start our workday. And then there's neighbors and people who join us too. Then the rest of the day, I come here early in the morning. I do a little bit of my writing here, but mostly back in my little house. And what I try to do there is preserve some great big chunks of non-stimulation. And what I mean by that is I don't turn on music, I don't turn on the TV. Now I do at other times. I don't want to make myself heroic, all right? I've been watching these dang debates. I don't know why. It just makes me mad every time I watch them. But was it Karl Barth who said you should have the Bible in one hand and the newspaper in the other? I do believe I don't have anything to preach about that's current unless I know what's happening in the world. So I don't want to be, and that was the Franciscan way. You'll read about that in the book. See, the form of monasticism up to Francis was monasticism, monks. We weren't monks. I'm a friar. I'm not a monk. I don't know if you know that, all right? Now, the friars had a different approach. Our approach was to stay right in the city with the people, with the active life, and still be a contemplative. That was much harder. But that became the Franciscan way, to remain involved with the world and still find your identity and your ground and your foundation, which of course is what you have to do. Are you a married man too?
I am, yes.
Well, and you have children too?
Two beautiful girls.
Two little girls, and you have?
2 little girls as well.
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah.
Both of you 2 little girls. How neat. Yeah, so I guess that's my practice. Yeah. Now, for years when I was on the road flying all around the world, I almost always took Lent in a hermitage. That's why I wrote half of my books.
Interesting.
Whatever the inspiration was would come upon me. When you have 40 days completely alone, it's just wonderful, wonderful the things that happen. Now that I don't travel so much and I do live in my little hermitage of my own, I don't do that anymore. Maybe I should. But I don't feel the need for it. I feel like now I can keep my ground and don't lose it as the way I did as much when I was a young man, I'm not saying I'm there, but I'm just saying it's easier. It's easier. Yeah.
So your book on the Trinity, do you know when it comes out? Yeah.
It's supposed to come out early November.
Early November.
It's going to be called The Divine Dance.
Okay.
The Divine Dance, the Trinity, and the Transformation of the Self. That's the subtitle. I'm so excited about it. I do feel I could die after this one's written. Not that it's that wonderful, but it's what I needed to say before I died. And I know I'm drawing it from the tradition. These aren't just Richard's ideas. They're very traditional ideas about the Trinity. But, Karl Rohr, the German Jesuit, he made the statement in the early 60s. He said, we could drop the doctrine of the Trinity tomorrow, which every Christian would agree is the absolute centerpiece, and it wouldn't change 98% of Christian practice, doctrine, or belief. And he said, how could something be so central and be so roundly ignored as anything significant at all? That just tells you right there how we've been on a track that's sort of a strange track. We're living in a time where now, because of the internet and globalization, we can study the Eastern Fathers if you want to. You can study the Desert Fathers. Fives would like to do things like that.
Yeah.
They do. They eat it up. So, we used to be able to remain blissfully ignorant because we didn't read Lutheran theologians. We didn't read, and a lot of them have some good stuff to say. So we can't stay in our little cubicles anymore. So it's the second axial age. I really believe that, if you're familiar with that Karl Jasper's language, where there's a huge convergence. And if you stay outside the convergence, it's by your own choice. But the knowledge, the wisdom, the perennial tradition is now available to everybody. And if you're ignorant now, you're culpably ignorant, it seems to me. Now, a lot of people don't have the freedom I have. I don't have children. I don't have a wife. But that makes it all the more incumbent upon me to use my time for the good of others. I think that's the only justification for celibacy. That, okay, you have a certain amount of leisure time, free time, quiet time that a father doesn't have. Okay.
Well, thank you so much.
You're welcome. You're wonderful.
Thank you for everything that you do and your whole life's work. It means so much to so many
sweet
people.
I could talk to people like you all day. God bless you.
So this has been the last episode of Season 2, and we're going to take a couple of months off from releasing new episodes to work on Season 3. We're really excited about some of the guests and topics you'll hear in Season 3. We're going to cover Christian feminism. We're going to cover womanism. We're going to come at the racism issue for people of color that aren't black and look at different experiences they've had. We'll talk to neuroscientist Andrew Newberg, one of my heroes. It's going to be a killer season, digging into more difficult topics with grace, digging into more mind-blowing topics through the lenses of science, art, and faith. So this feed is going to be quiet for a couple of months while we work on that. But we're going to start a new podcast called The Liturgist Conversations, and that's going to be exclusive to our supporters on Patreon. That's going to be a show that comes out every other week, and we're going to talk about what our patrons tell us to. So our patrons will decide the topics for the Liturgist Conversation. So if you'd like to support the Liturgist Podcast and get a second podcast exclusive to supporters, just go to theliturgist.com/podcast and click on the Patreon icon. Now, I've realized some of you listen to the show, but you can't spell liturgist, which I totally get. That happened to me as well. So if you want to go to our website, it's Liturgist, LITURGISTS, and that's a .com. That'll take you right to the website. Click on podcast and click on the Patreon icon, and you can be a part of this new show we're launching. It's going to be super informal and totally working off the conversations we have with our patrons on Patreon. So see you in a few months if you're not a supporter, or see you in 2 weeks if you are.